Good day. As the collapse of the Afghan military and the positions of the Afghan government across Afghanistan accelerate, and as the Taliban continues to make ever faster and deeper advances across Afghan territory, there is a frenetic diplomatic activity on the part of all the neighbouring states about what to do with the situation. And as happens regularly now, the centre of this activity is Moscow, which has, perhaps to the surprise of Russia's own leaders, become increasingly, over the last couple of years, the cockpit of international diplomacy, as in the late 19th century Berlin used to be, and as in the second half of the 20th century Washington once was. Anyway, what we have had over the last couple of weeks are a series of telephone conversations between the leaders of two of the Central Asian states that used to form part of the Soviet Union with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Central Asian states in question are Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Tajikistan is an ally of Russia and is part of the Eurasian Economic Community and of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, Russia's own system of defense alliances built up by the Russians since the end of the Cold War and binding together the militaries of certain former Soviet states. Uzbekistan, until fairly recently, has been rather more distant from Moscow, but increasingly it appears to be reintegrating itself into the Russian-led Eurasian structures. And in the readout of the conversation between Putin and the president of Uzbekistan, it was notable that the two countries referred to each other as allies. So both of these countries border Afghanistan. The Russians operate a major base in Tajikistan. They are formal allies of Tajikistan, and they now have allied relations with Uzbekistan, which will probably also become a full-scale ally shortly. And over the course of this conversation, the Tajikistan leadership president asked Putin for military help to stabilize the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, where Afghan soldiers have been crossing the border into Tajikistan as they flee the Taliban's advance. Apparently, around 1,000 Afghan soldiers have now done so, and they're being held in various forms of protective custody within Tajikistan, which has also called up around 20,000 of its own troops to try to stabilize the border, and is now obviously, as I said, looking to Russia for help. So those are two of the key Central Asian states which are now looking for help to Moscow, and which have contacted Moscow and spoken to Putin to ask for help. But we also learn that other parties are also becoming increasingly involved and are taking active action to try to get Moscow's help or assistance to try to stabilize the situation in Afghanistan. So the Indian foreign minister, for example, is now on his way to Moscow, transiting through Tehran. Now, India has a long-standing and historic connection with Afghanistan. It has been opposed to the Taliban, which it sees as an ally of Pakistan, India's perpetual rival in the Indian subcontinent, and India does not want to see the Taliban gain unconstrained power in Afghanistan again. Historically, the Russians and the Indians, who have both had wary relations with Pakistan and with Pakistan's ally China, have tended to work together in Afghanistan. They did so, for example, to a certain extent in the 1980s. And it may be that the Indians are hoping that something similar can be achieved again, even though obviously the geopolitical situation between Russia and India, and between Russia and India's adversaries, China and Pakistan, has changed radically in the last few years. Anyway, the Indian foreign minister is, as I said, travelling to Moscow as I am speaking. I should say that this was a trip arranged some time ago in order to prepare the ground for President Putin's forthcoming trip to India, but there's no doubt at all, and the Indian media are confirming that it is Afghanistan and the Taliban advances which will be at the top of the discussions. Meanwhile, the Russians are also busy organising a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is an organization that brings together many East Asian states, including not just Russia, but China also, and many of the same Central Asian states that are concerned about the situation in Afghanistan and whose presidents have been telephoning Putin in Moscow. That meeting is due to take place on July 13th, 14th, in Dushanbe, the capital of Tajik-Afghan. This meeting of this meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it will take place at foreign ministers level. And apparently, it will issue a joint statement on the situation in and around Afghanistan. Now, I'm saying that it is the Russians who have called this meeting. That may not be exactly true, but it's clear that they're taking playing a large role in coordinating this meeting and in agreeing this statement. And note that China will be involved, and its signature will also be on that statement when it appears. I would add that both India and Pakistan are observer member states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also. So all this frenetic diplomatic activity is going on as it is becoming increasingly clear that the days of the US-backed government in Afghanistan are almost certainly numbered, and as the United States gradually edges away from Afghanistan. Where is all this going to lead? Where is this going to go? What can the Russians do? What can anybody else do? Well, I think the first thing to say is that the Russians have categorically ruled out any possibility of their own troops being deployed in Afghanistan itself. This is confirmed by Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov, and we have a readout from TASS, the official Russian news agency, which reports his words as follows. Russia does not discuss deployment of its military contingent in Afghanistan with Kabul amid the ongoing escalation near Afghan borders, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told journalists on Monday. No discussions take place in this regard, the spokesman said. So no deployment of Russian forces in Afghanistan. Now, of course, the Russians have long history of sending their troops in Afghanistan. They were there and fought a bitter war there in the 1980s. And though there is a view, which, by the way, I share, that they did a lot better than the United States has managed to do whilst they were there, the fact is that it was not a happy experience for them, and they have no intention of going back, and Peskov has just said as much. Then so if they're not going to go back, what are they going to do? Well, I'm going to make a shrewd guess, which is that they're going to talk to the Taliban. Now, there have been discussions between the Russians and the Taliban before. And before we get overexcited about this, it's important to remember that the US has been negotiating with the Taliban for some time now in places like Doha. And so the Russians, by talking to the Taliban, are doing nothing extraordinary and nothing unusual. But what I think the Russians will be telling the Taliban is that if events take their course in Afghanistan, as seems likely they will do, and if the Taliban re-establish themselves as the government of Afghanistan, as is also likely, then the Russians will not stand in their way, though they would probably prefer some kind of power sharing arrangement between the Taliban and other forces in Afghanistan. But they will not stand in the way of a Taliban government being re-established, but they will insist that the Taliban does not host the various Islamist terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and especially ISIS on Afghan territory. And I strongly suspect that the Taliban will agree. My strong impression is that the Taliban are as alarmed by the reappearance, the emergence of ISIS in parts of Afghanistan as the Russians are, and that they will take strong action to try to suppress ISIS. And it's not inconceivable that they could look to the Russians and to some of the neighbouring states for support in achieving that. I also strongly suspect that the days when the Taliban were prepared to host Al-Qaeda are also gone. The Taliban cannot have forgotten how much trouble Al-Qaeda brought down upon them when it became involved in the various terrorist activities, including, as I believe and as official view holds, the terrorist attacks launched against the United States on the 11th of September 2001. So I don't think the Taliban will want to see Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan either. My strong impression of the Taliban is that it is essentially an Afghan, or perhaps even a Pashto nationalist organization with a fundamentalist Islamic colouring. It's not part of some great Islamist crusade to re-establish the caliphate. At least that's my own view and my own interpretation of what the Taliban is all about. They will establish their emirate in Afghanistan, and emirates are supposed to be component parts of the greater caliphate which is to come, but they will not take any steps to engineer the creation of the caliphate beyond that. And I do not think that they will host or happily host movements like Al-Qaeda, and certainly not ISIS, which will only bring more trouble upon them. My guess is that the Taliban, having won the war and having established themselves finally as the government of the country, will want peace in Afghanistan so that they can carry out the major task of reconstructing the country. And they will want to do that alongside help from the external states. And those states will, of course, include Russia, but also China, perhaps to an even greater extent, possibly Iran, perhaps Pakistan. And I think that will be the Taliban's priority, and I am sure that is what they're telling Moscow. So I suspect that over the next couple of weeks, we will see negotiations going on behind the scenes between the Taliban and various international players, but first and foremost the Russians, in order to try to steer a course towards Afghanistan once more under Taliban control, but perhaps in some way reintegrated in the wider international community, and perhaps established conceivably even within the Eurasian institutions like the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and the rest, which it is ultimately in their interests to see happen. Well, we will see. All I will say is that if any side is able to sort out some kind of diplomatic outcome to this conflict, which would lead to a stable situation in Central Asia, almost certainly that party is the Russians. I can't realistically see who else can do it. Pakistan lacks the skill. China is far away. India is unacceptable to the Taliban, and Iran undoubtedly will play a part, but it is divided from the Taliban by unbridgeable sectarian differences. Though the Russians and the Taliban fought each other back in the 1980s, there's apparently a certain grudging respect on the part of each towards the other. In fact, I've read reports of how the Taliban was always careful when it captured Russian contractors in Afghanistan to hand them over quietly to the Russians, seeking to avoid diplomatic incidents. So I think it's likely that the Russians and the Taliban between them will be able to patch something up. If so, then the Afghan wars, which stretch all the way back to that disastrous decision in 1979, when the United States decided to back the anti-Soviet Mujahideen in Afghanistan, will finally end, and Afghanistan might finally see some return to peace. Let's hope so. I will finish by making this observation. If the Russians are able to come to some kind of modus vivendi with the Taliban, then that will show the extent to which Russia has been liberated from the legacy of the Soviet Union. Though the Soviet Union was a far more powerful country than today's Russia is, it was also an ideological construct, a communist state dedicated to the program of communist support, or supporting communism around the world. So when a communist government came to power in Kabul in 1978, the Soviet Union, very much as we now know, against its own better judgment, found itself drawn in to supporting it because it felt ideologically and politically obliged to do so. And that, of course, was what led to the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan in the 1980s and to the war that the Soviet Union had to fight in Afghanistan thereafter. The Russians, by contrast, are not bound by ideology anymore. They have no obligation to support on ideological grounds any particular party. That means that they can deal with everyone, including a group like the Taliban, which they once fought against many years ago when they were themselves communists. So, from the Russian point of view, putting behind them the legacy of the Soviet Union from a diplomatic angle has been an unqualified boon. Perhaps people might want to consider that fact when understanding what the differences between today's Russia and the Soviet Union of the past are. But nonetheless, the Russians and the Taliban undoubtedly are talking to each other, and we will see what they come up with. Thank you for joining me on this program. I look forward to you joining me again in future programs, both on this channel and in future and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. And please also remember to check out Alex's channel. You find links under this video. Please also go to our other platforms, BitChute, SuperU, Locals, and the rest. You'll find links under this video. Also, please also Remember to support us to the extent that you feel you can via Patreon, PayPal and Subscribestar, and also by coming to our shop and buying the amazing products which you will find there, like our magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts and all the rest. And lastly, if you like this video, please remember to tick the like button and also to check your subscription to this channel. And thank you again for joining me today, and I look forward to you joining me again in the future, and have a wonderful day until then.